So, Lindsay, from the sponsor's point of view, what are they looking for typically?
I think it's a combination of what they're looking for, and also what is important to know what to turn off when riders are also, or events indeed, are approaching potential companies to get sponsored. So it's important to know, because there's a lot of misconception, and people think that it's only top-tier riders who get sponsored, and that's obviously not true. Indeed, these days, there's actually more and more companies and brands that are looking for the middle-tiered rider, because that's actually where they find they get the most value for money, and also can have some of the best relationships as well. That being said, you're going to get your top-tiered riders. Your Olympians are obviously always going to be sponsored by various companies, both in the equestrian world and outside of it. But it is important to know, that you still have a chance at being a sponsored rider, even if you're not at that top of the tree. One of the very first things a company is going to do is Google you. I hate to say that, but it's very true. They're going to Google you. They're going to look at your website and see how professional looking your website is. They're going to look at your social media. It's not just about the number of followers. It's about how active that rider actually is on their social media channels. And it's about professionalism on those social media channels as well. So certainly inappropriate photos, not good from a potential sponsor's standpoint. You'd be amazed, but we've actually seen that in the past. And if you go on there, it might have been great that you won a competition and let your hair down, but if you let your hair down a little bit too much, that's probably not something to put on your social media. So that's something to bear in mind as well. When submitting an application, whether it's an event or rider to a company, cannot stress enough, bad spelling and grammar, instant turn off. Letters probably not going to even get to the second stage. So that sounds obvious, but again, you'd be amazed how many letters come in where the grammar and spelling is absolutely terrible. Never, ever, ever submit applications via social media, and certainly do not beg via social media. That's a big no-no and a turn-off. The one worst example I think I ever had in the past with my former company that I worked for is somebody basically wrote, I hear you're looking for sponsored riders, and I deserve to be one via Facebook, and obviously that didn't go very far. So really think about these things. Some of them sound so obvious that you'd be amazed how many people get this wrong. Very often, I would say 90% of the time, that rider has to have had some experience with the product or the brand of that company if they want to be promoted by them. It goes an awfully long way if that rider has done some promotion without having to be endorsed or sponsored by the company prior to approaching a company for sponsorship. That gets you amazing brownie points. So whether that's they mentioned it on their social media channels, or they wrote a little testimonial about the product or company and put it on that company's Facebook page, that goes an awful long way. That being said, there are exceptions, and this is usually at the higher tier levels of sponsored riders, where a company may decide that they ultimately want to sponsor a rider who doesn't necessarily already use the product. In those cases, it's typical, for example, if it was a supplement, to do a 60 or 90-day trial so that the rider would have full experience and knowledge of that product and genuinely have seen it work and used it prior to being sponsored. And indeed, again, there's examples where, riders have come and said, I want to be endorsed or sponsored by your brand. And a company has said, here's the product, go try it and don't come back to us and talk to us until you have. So that's something to bear in mind as well. Thinking about what companies actually expect from sponsored riders, I don't know any company these days that pretty much doesn't have a contract. So you probably are going to be expected to sign a contract, whether that's for an event or a sponsored rider. There's going to be something on paper. There's going to be expectations from both sides that have to be met. It isn't set in stone, though. So that being said, if there's something in there a rider or an event is not happy with, these things are always, always negotiable. Many events, for example, will come to companies wanting sponsorship, seeking sponsorship, and they'll say, here's what we will offer you if you give us $10,000. And the first thing the company will do is say, well, I like X, Y, and Z on that, but I don't like A and B, so I want those changing. So there has to be flexibility on both ends. I think that's very important to understand. Again, this sounds incredibly obvious, but you'd be amazed how many times this is an area where riders perhaps don't consider. If a rider's using a competing brand or product, you don't probably stand any chance of getting sponsored by a company if you approach them and you're using a supplement that does exactly the same thing, for example, as that company sells. So be aware of that, because even if a company sells multiple supplements, but they happen to sell, for example, a joint supplement, and you're already sponsored by a joint company, sponsorship is probably not going to happen. So do bear that in mind. A big no-no as well, and again, even at the top levels, riders can get this wrong, is that if you've got a written contract with a company that's been signed, and then you go out and somebody offers you $3,000 to promote their product, and you think, hey, great, that's a nice amount of cash, which is wonderful for the riders. They can always use that additional income. That initial sponsor is probably going to drop you very, very quickly, and that even has happened with Olympians. So that's a big area to be careful about. On the good side, the positive sides, think about always having a point person to be that person, to be those sponsored riders' point of contact. They're going to need to call in. They're going to want products. They're going to want somebody to call and obtain product when they run out. They're going to want logo wear. They're going to have questions about when they're going to clinics or events as to how they can get the company or brand or products involved. And it's not appropriate just to give them the number for the order line and say, when you run out of product, please call. And that has happened. And it just does not create a good impression. It does not make that sponsored rider feel important. If it's an event, then certainly that the person that's in charge of that event should be liaising with the marketing manager at the company who is sponsoring the event, and probably working with a field salesperson in their territory as well that's ultimately going to have the responsibility of attending that event. So relationships absolutely key. And the person that is assigned to those sponsored riders or assigned to work with the contacts at an event should be following either that rider's progress or the build-up to the event, should be using every opportunity to promote the event or promote the sponsored riders and making sure that it's a two-way street, and just building and maintaining that relationship. And I can't overemphasize enough the value of positive relationships. I really can't, because it goes way beyond literally just giving a rider product or giving them clothing to wear. It's so important to have a great relationship with sponsored riders, because ultimately when you do need a favor and the chips are down, they will do it for you if you have that great relationship with them. So on a final note as well, looking at kind of both the ways not to do it and also the things to consider when seeking sponsorship. If there's ever a case where, it just doesn't work out, and that is life. Sometimes things don't work out between a sponsored rider and a product, and maybe they just decide that product's not for them, or they decide that they really do prefer a different brand of saddle pad, so they are going to seek sponsorship elsewhere. And this applies to both sides. Always pass on good terms, because the equestrian world is very small at the end of the day in that sense, and it's very, very important to leave on good terms. So, always break up, so to speak, amicably if that ever should need to happen.
Okay. Great. So one of the things that a rider